have to say I'm a little self-conscious. I don't have my red shoes on after Alex sang that song. I think we need to start merchandising some red shoes to make a lot of dough. So this gave me an opportunity to think a little bit about these last few weeks and kind of what it represents and what's the context. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how CORE, like the moment that I knew CORE had to be an organization and why it needed. And we have people who formed the actual organization here, like Jen, Noreen, Jesse. We're all part of that original meeting that said, okay, let's do this. But there was a moment when I'm thinking, this has got to happen, and I want to describe when that moment was. 2005, Arnie Duncan comes out as CEO of the public schools and says, Englewood High School is a culture of failure, and I'm the union delegate at the school at the time. And the very next morning, the vice president of the union of CTU, Ted Dallas, comes to my school, and I walk through the door, and he says, hey, Jackson, come here. I got to tell you something. Today the board's gonna come and tell you guys your school's closing. And I'm like, holy shit, what's going on? And he says, there's really not much you can do. You guys should get your resumes ready, start sprucing up everything in them, and get the applications out because this doesn't look too good. And at that moment, I'm confronted with this realization that this union is not a fighting union. That there's not a bone in its body where it's willing to really put itself out there on behalf of its membership or on big public policy issues that affect large swaths of public schools across the city. And that they're much more comfortable in backroom deals. And it brings me to this quote that I remember reading from an auto worker in the 70s where he says, why am I going to kill myself if there's no rewards for my suicide? And that kind of depressing thought, it weighs down on me at that time, at that moment. Because this is the kind of motivation we're going to get from our leaders. We're dead in the water. This union's done. It's toast. It's over. And at that moment, Al Ramirez and I started having conversations. How do we kind of start fomenting some dissent within this union? I met Jesse. I met Jen. I met Noreen. Met others. And we started doing this. Another illustration, though, is in 2008, Marilyn Stewart has a rally to fight Renaissance 2010. And I think 300 people show up. And the union spent a lot of time, money. They have this huge, sophisticated speaker system in Daley Plaza. And hardly anybody shows up. And so, I confront her. I said, hey, what happened, Marilyn? Not a lot of people. This is a really critical issue. They're shutting down schools right and left. And her answer was, well, the members don't care. The members don't even if it's in their self-interest, they're not coming to things. And it was that sort of approach to thinking, we make a call to action, that's all we have to do, and then magically, people will come. It's like some kind of, magical ballpark phenomenon. No, it actually takes a series of organizational decisions on how do you set up the infrastructure to ensure you're engaging memberships, to make certain that memberships knows that you're thinking about what they care about. And that's what we kind of set out to do. That old union leadership, they were corrupt, they were inept, they were all of those things. We used to say, they're not only asleep at the wheel, they're joyriding. Margarita pitchers, all the rest. But that wasn't the main reason they failed. The main reason, the last contract, let's look at the last contract environment. 2007 to 2012, we've been living under this old contract. It was, to our view, voted down amongst our delegates, even though they manipulated the vote and made it seem like they won it. And why was it voted down? It was a fairly good contract economically. It was 4% a year for 5 years. You had rights if you got laid off. You went into a pool for a year at your salary and benefits. It had a pension enhancement program that was pretty generous. Had decent health care benefits. What changed? Why is it that now we have a slightly less beneficial contract economically, and yet I think this contract is going to pass overwhelmingly? Why is that? What's the shift in consciousness that's occurred? Well, one thing is that those benefits of that contract weren't as good as they appeared. The board took the 4% raise last year. They invented new layoff categories and fired people en masse. They had a huge increase in charter density over the duration of that contract that pushed along massive school closings, turnarounds, consolidations, reconstitutions. So people kind of realized, afterwards that, okay, we were sold a false bill of goods. But this was at the beginning, when we couldn't see all of that. And it turns out that the membership was right to be lukewarm about that contract, because it was less about the details, and it was much more about a lack of urgency, the fake battle cries leading up to authorization, the perennial routine of going into battle by stoking the anger of the membership but having no intent to actually confront the boss or the shadowy billionaires and right-wing demagogues who were supporting them, or the billionaires and Democrats who were supporting them. So without the internal democratic process to identify our issues, to engage our members, without thinking beyond the bread and butter issues that matter deeply to teachers and paraprofessionals in this city, this was not going to be a good method for getting activated 30,000 people. The membership has not been now or in 2007 in the mood for the rhetoric of labor peace. And I think this leadership realized that fairly quickly. That to lay down your sword, after you've whooped the enemy is one thing. But to go into battle without a weapon is an entirely different matter altogether. And this also was part of the problem with the leadership prior to Marilyn Stewart, when Debbie Lynch, a reformer, came into power. When she came back and told teachers, I didn't just get you the bacon, I got you the whole hog. And then people saw, well, wait a second, there's huge lack of reality between this contract and our ability to fight the threats that we face in terms of school closings, in terms of lowering class size, in terms of providing the resources that we know our children deserve. And people didn't feel that that was an honest depiction. We haven't made those mistakes. We've made plenty of mistakes, but that's not one of them. We've told people very clearly and precisely there were advances in this contract, there were setbacks, and there were draws. But we're more powerful than we ever have been in a long time. And people understand that the contract reflects those efforts and that we're in a better place now than we have been in a while to actually win and have victories for a long time, not just now. So what else has changed in the CTU? I think as a result of our leadership coming in, we have this organizing model that Jen referred to. There's a new focus on internal outreach with our members. We used opportunities like when the mayor tried to shove the longer day down our throats through waiver votes to really go out into each and every school and have organizing conversations to agitate the membership, really see what was going on, answer questions honestly and directly, and talk about strategy. How are we going to fight these things? And that really activated people in a way that hadn't been done in a long time. The second thing is we have a community board with 20 different community and labor organizations. Some people in the room, Martin, Science, Jason from SEIU Unite Here, Erica from Parents for Teachers, are part of this community board where we really have praxis with people around the city, and that's helped a tremendous amount to get critical friends around us at important times. Stand Up Chicago, Alex Hahn. I think this could get lost in the recap by a lot of people writing about what happened. I think they held these huge spectacle events that exposed how these billionaires and financiers and hedge fund operators are responsible. The banks are accountable for all of the devastation in our neighborhoods, for the loss of jobs, for the foreclosure crisis. And that's intimately connected to our inability to properly pay and finance and resource schools. And it gave us an opportunity to really get our members out with other people, allies, in big spectacles, take arrests, challenge the underlying root causes of things, and raise consciousness in a different way. School closings. Our community board challenged us to march on the mayor's office, for example, and do a sit-in at City Hall, and go march on the mayor's house. And we were uncomfortable with that. I'll be honest with you. That was something, we had a lot of internal debate over whether that was a good idea. But ultimately, we understand that you don't do these top-down relationships. The union needs help. Here's a few bucks to fund an organizer now and again. Come help us. No, it was much more of a real relationship where people are saying, this is a good strategy, let's do it, and we have to think about it and try it out and make mistakes and take risks to see where we can go and how far we can take it. And then I want to mention educational apartheid as sort of a way to understand what's going on in Chicago. You know, I have to acknowledge that myself, I had some trepidation over whether our members, you know, particularly our white members, would be able to grasp that complex notion of, you know, racial division in Chicago, and that, you know, they're working in schools with huge racial disparities, whether they would feel that it was an attack on them, whether they're ready for that kind of understanding. But Karen Lewis, you know, and Jesse Jackson Jr. and Brandon, and he'll talk about this, really pushed that, and I think it's been tremendously important in this fight. And he'll talk more, I think, about that. And then the Solidarity Committee. I think that was a critical thing, and I know Sue's going to talk more about that. So I'll just wrap up by saying, what are we looking at moving forward? We have to figure out a way to harness the momentum we've created and make sure it doesn't dissipate. You know, I think we're finally seeing that the shadowy world of corporate reformers are starting to shake out. You know, Bruce Rauner and Jesse going toe-to-toe is a good example. We see, you know, the Pritzkers, Alec getting exposed, Michelle Rhee, you know, saying, I'm really a Democrat, and having to say that a lot is interesting. Defer, hedge fund operators, you know, and that we're going to have to continue to have direct confrontation with these people, expose them, and cost them some money, and diminish their influence. This next period is really critical. There's a lot of dangers and opportunities ahead, and it will determine in no small part whether all of us can do something with this momentum, whether or not this fight over school closings and organizing charter schools over the next 6 months, whether we have more victories or whether we kind of fall on our face. So I want to argue that we really have to figure out the next steps and not allow this moment to just dissipate all the activity, all the amazing work you've done in the room. We'll figure out a way, how are we going to challenge the racist, destabilizing impact of school closings, charter school expansion, which divests from existing schools. How are we going to continue to press for the schools Chicago students deserve, whether it's air conditioning, social workers, art, music, world language, the whole nine, and keep this going. So I hope that this is just the beginning. Thanks.